everyone. Welcome back to the Refugee Matters series. I know it's been a while since we've hosted one. My name is Nada Sumik, and I'm the National Field Manager for We Are All America. And on today's show, we're going to jump right into it. We have a lot of great conversation to cover, and we will be specifically talking about Title 42 and rapid response happening around that. This discussion is a follow-up to our roundtable that we held last fall, and we'll be sharing updates on Title 42 with the recent announcement that the federal administration made. We will also be hearing from our wonderful guest speakers on the actions taking place around the country and how their local communities are responding to anti-asylum legislation and also organizing on the ground. And I'm joined by several amazing guests today. So allow me to introduce my first guest speaker, who's going to kind of give us an overview of what's happening with Title 42 and some of the challenges we're seeing. So Ana Ortega, I want to extend a warm welcome to you. Ana is the advocacy strategist with Human Rights First. And Ana, I guess my first question for you is, can you tell for the broader audience who's not as familiar with Title 42, what is Title 42 and the impact that we're seeing on those seeking asylum?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Naira, and thank you to everyone for making time to join this conversation. We truly appreciate it. And yes, let me start by explaining briefly what Title 42 is. So Title 42 is a public health law that authorizes the U.S. Border officials to expel immigrants seeking protection at our different ports of entry throughout the borders with Mexico. And we saw Title 42 first being implemented by the Trump administration. And this Title 42 policy has been continued to be used by the Biden administration throughout our different ports of entry. And just to give you a few numbers, the policy has been active since 2020, since March of 2020, and there have been over 2 million individual expulsions of immigrants, including asylum seekers, to Mexico. And since the Biden administration took office, my organization, Human Rights First, has documented over 10,000 incidents of violence. By violence, I'm talking about kidnappings, crimes, rape, extortion, discrimination against some of the most vulnerable populations that are seeking protection in the U.S. Members of the LGBTQ community, Black and Brown asylum seekers, women, children. And let's keep in mind that this 10,000 number, is just a small fraction of all the crimes that go undocumented and unreported due to fear of retaliation.
Wow, that is a really, really big number of people who are, impacted. And like you said, that is only what's being actually documented. I know recent news from the administration that was shared about ending Title 42. Can you talk a little bit about that and the backlash we're seeing and challenges to ending Title 42?
Absolutely. So on April 1st, we received and welcomed the administration's and the CDC's announcement that they would be terminating the use of the Title 42 policy at our borders. We welcomed this announcement. We had been advocating and fighting for this for the past 2 years. So it's great news. Unfortunately, the Title 42 expulsions continue until its expected end of May 23rd. So soon after the April 1st announcement, we began to see an unfortunate backlash from members of Congress who manifested their concern with the termination of the Title 42 policy, alleging that this would continue with the expansion of the COVID-19 disease And we saw a bill being that will soon be introduced, as well as an attempt to include an amendment on the COVID-19 relief bill. So it's concerning that some of our congressional representatives from both parties have expressed their support to keeping Title 42 in use. And what this means is that our members of Congress are simply okay with the U.S. Expelling vulnerable populations back into danger in Mexico.
Wow, that is a lot to take in, right? We're seeing people who are, as you mentioned, some of the most vulnerable individuals and being expelled and not given an opportunity when it is a legal right for every individual to seek asylum when they're fleeing persecution and violence in their home countries. So thank you for giving kind of that perspective of what's happening and where we're at with Title 42. And Stacy, I'd like to turn it over to you to kind of dive a little bit deeper into some work that's happening in specific states, including yours in the state of Texas around asylum. Just to kind of give a proper introduction, Stacy is with an amazing organization called Mormon Women for Ethical Government that does a lot of advocacy, and she is the Texas chapter coordinator. So, Stacy, can you tell us, first of all, a little bit about your organization, and also tell us what is happening with Title 42 in Texas?
Thank you. So, Mormon Women for Ethical Government is a national organization. We really are nonpartisan, meaning we aren't endorsing a party or a candidate or any kind of political affiliation, but we feel a great responsibility to uphold the rights and responsibilities of all citizens, and also the rights or the responsibilities of the government back to our citizens. And we also really feel strongly that we have responsibilities to others, not just those in our country, but to all other human beings, in our entire world. We feel really strongly that their dignity and their worth is valuable, and we need to stand up for all people. And so kind of what we've been seeing in Texas right now has been, unfortunately, very reactionary. We know that the problems at the border have been ongoing, right, for years and years. We haven't had any federal immigration legislation since 1996. And so we know that we've kind of been doing Band-Aids, and it's a back and forth constantly of, at least in border states, specifically Texas, where I'm from, we need more money for border security, and then we'll talk about solutions. And so right now with Governor Abbott, like I said, very reactionary. He has, just in the last week or two since the announcement of Title 42 ending, he's been opting to expand his Operation Lone Star. Now, Operation Lone Star is what he's been using to protect the border, in his words. He utilizes the Department of Public Safety and the Texas National Guard. The numbers that he shared of, apprehensions and things are unfortunately a little bit hard to filter out, because not all of them are necessarily people who have crossed the border, either at ports of entry or between ports of entry. So it's hard to look at the data and really understand what is going on. But we do know that the operation has been pretty well plagued with problems. Right now, they don't have the funding to continue past May 1st. There's been a lot of low morale, the general low morale because of pay, because people aren't really sure the point of what they're doing, and they don't feel it's very worthwhile. So we are seeing in Texas, like I said, very reactionary, but also, instead of solutions of how do we kind of help these processes of how we're going to allow asylum seekers or any person who's attempting to cross at the border. How do we process them? How do we make sure they're vetted, it's safe? Instead, Texas has been working really hard on just keeping people out. And that is really the point of them keeping Title 42, is it's a way to keep numbers lower. Now, one thing that we've seen is that a lot of these numbers that we're hearing, in March, NIF said that there were 221,303 migrants at the border. But when you really look at that, there's a lot of recidivism. So I think the recidivism rate is at 28%. And so, they're reporting incidences, not how many people have tried to cross. So with Title 42, they're really, it's got a little bit of a gap, right? There is no penalty for repeated crossings. And so instead of giving people their right and our lawful process of allowing someone to seek asylum, we're basically circumventing that law completely and denying them asylum, right? And then they're trying to come back. So with Title 42, with no penalty, it's just increasing the crossings rather than really coming up with a solution. So that's really a difficult thing that we're seeing. We've also seen the Texas legislators, Cruz and Cornyn, as well as many representatives from Congress, as well as state congressmen here in Texas, drafted a letter to the executive branch, to the Department of I think Human Services or Health Services, and they asked them to keep Title 42, and it had a list of questions. And the main issue with that is that Texas has for the last little while really focused on the executive branch and, a lot of these reactionary things like busing people to Washington, D.C. It becomes more about kind of that back and forth with the executive branch rather than solutions. And Texas really needs to focus on rallying our Congress members. We have Cornyn and Cruz and all of those other people that signed the letter that are in a position to make lasting immigration change right now. They see the problems, but instead of using this moment to say, here's our problem, what will be our solution, we're just going to substitute a health policy, which really isn't, one, it's not been effective as far as keeping COVID numbers low. It hasn't worked for the intended purpose. And two, we're not focusing on the long-term solutions. We're going to continue putting, are they ever going to let Title 42 lapse? If they had their way, probably not. And so rather than kind of bowing to this pressure of keep Title 42 until who knows when, we have over a month, right, to finish this, to get those processes in order. We've already had a change to how asylum seekers can be processed. You can have later, there's a different way that they can be processed at the border right now, rather than having to go through an immigration judge. So there are changes being made. And I think a big thing that Texas really needs to focus on is working with the legislators that we already have. They're already concerned. They're already making headlines about it. And we really need to use our momentum differently. And that's kind of the main issue that we've been noticing here, is that we have a lot of people concerned. We know that communities are overwhelmed. We know that, I listened to the Title 42 committee hearing in the House 2 weeks ago, and we heard from the sheriff in Arizona. We heard from different representatives from different states. And there is concern about what might happen, but we have the ability and the time to make changes now. So.
Yeah, thank you, Stacy, for that. That is really, really good overview of kind of what's happening in Texas, and I think for many people who do not understand the asylum process or do not understand even Title 42, I mean, it's many of the previous administration's policy are, still being implemented and impacting those seeking asylum. And also the way that the system is set up, it's just not functional, right? Our immigration system, especially, they are, I think many people don't know, but there's not many other ways for people to apply and seek asylum. Many of those opportunities and pathways have been closed off from the previous administration. And so the people that we're seeing at the ports of entry, this is really the only way that they are able to seek asylum. And so I think that there is this misunderstanding of like how people, well, why don't they come in the legal way? Well, there is no other pathway really for people. And so I just want to kind of bring that up as well. And then with the Title 42, I mean, we're seeing COVID numbers go down drastically. We've seen, that we're no longer in a pandemic. So to your point, why are we seeing these legislators push, this legislation that we're with Title 42, trying to hold on to something that we're seeing the numbers go down? And I guess I'd like to also, you mentioned a little bit about like some of the legislative work happening. Can you share just a little bit more about advocacy efforts that you all are pushing for in Texas?
Yeah. So during that hearing, I listened a lot to Al Green and Veronica Escobar, and they had just such, wonderful perspectives. Representative Escobar's in El Paso, and so she's right there. She knows what's going on. But Representative Green, he noted that, this problem's been going on for a long time. And he said any condition that would cause a mother to say the risk is better than staying should be our focus. He said we can do something more for our neighbors, but it has to be the will of Congress. And he mentioned, we've done it for Ukraine. So right now, one main advocacy effort is, I think, just educating people really to understand what is Title 42, letting them know that asylum is legal, but it's only legal at the port of entries. People can't stay home and wait. They can't apply necessarily at home. They're fleeing, danger. So the processes that people think they understand, they really don't. So that's one advocacy measure we're trying to work on is educating people. So making connections with other groups, but also utilizing calls to action. That's one thing that MWAG is working on right now, is not just keep Title 42, but also opposing some other anti-immigration legislation. But one thing that I've been trying to work on, but kind of having a hard time, and I think there's just a lot going on right now, a lot of different issues in Texas, but really, I think combating that misinformation that you're getting from Governor Abbott when he's calling people illegal immigrants, that they're not illegal. They have the documentation necessary to come. They did voluntarily go on the bus that he provided, but then he used that moment to make it seem like something that it wasn't. So really standing up against the misinformation, educating people on the processes, and also giving better education on what's coming next, right? So, what happens if Title 42 goes away, and letting them know the plans. So that's something that we've been trying to work on. And I think we kind of have a gap right now because there is so much overwhelm, and it's, kind of where do we look now? Because there's a lot of, like I said, reactionary things. And so we need to not be distracted by those because, they're going to be quick and over because, people have moved on from that moment in the media. And we really need to focus on that education component because, like we said, Title 42 isn't immigration legislation. It's a policy. It's not forever. It's not long lasting. And just letting people know, I think number one, that asylum is legal and that people have a right to come here, and we have to honor and respect that right. It's our law to respect that.
And Naira, if I may jump in, I think Stacy did a wonderful job of explaining what we're seeing at the borders. And just to remind everyone, Title 42 has been in place for 2 years. Before that, we didn't have Title 42, and we saw people who were seeking protection and asylum being processed at the borders. And now with Title 42 in place, we're seeing that, for example, with Ukraine, with people from Ukraine. There have been over 10,000 Ukrainians who have been processed at our borders, mainly the San Isidro port of entry near Tijuana in San Diego. And we've seen how they are being processed in an effective and humane way. And what is this showing us? This is showing us that border immigration officials are capable, they have the resources to process individuals in need of protection in a humane and fast way, still vetting everyone who's coming in. But this can be done. So it's a reminder that Title 42 hasn't been in place for since the beginning of our asylum system. It's only been in place for 2 years, and we can process asylum seekers in a humane way. They're showing this to us by the way they're processing individuals, Ukrainian citizens, which it's great. We welcome it, and we would like for this same process to be implemented to other people seeking protection.
Yeah, thank you for that, Stacy and Anna. And that's a really great point that you bring up, Anna, because for us who are on the advocacy front, we have been seeing, especially as the Ukrainian situation has been unfolding, to your point, Anna, we have been seeing how different refugee groups are being treated differently, right, when seeking asylum. And everyone should have the same right to seek asylum and be given, that in an effective manner and with dignity and have a, due process in seeking asylum. So that is something that we certainly continue to ask from the administration and our members of Congress. And I'd like to shift it over a little bit to you, Christy, who is my wonderful colleague and friend from Arizona. She's the Arizona chapter coordinator with Mormon Women for Ethical Government. And given that Arizona is also a border state, I'd love to hear from you in a little bit more about what's happening there and what are some messages you have been hearing about asylum from Arizona elected officials.
Yeah, so MWAG, as Stacy mentioned, we are an advocacy organization, but we're also an education organization. And a lot of times we think, like our senators are Sinema and Kelly, and you would think that they would be very educated and understand what's going on at the borders. And there's a lot of things that they're actually not. They don't, they have so much that they have to learn and so many different topics that oftentimes they don't always know the details of what's happening. And so as Anna mentioned, that Title 42 is, supposed to be lifted on May 23rd, I think. And Senators Kelly and Sinema have actually sponsored a bill that would delay that another 60 days. And they have they issued a joint statement recently saying that they're concerned that we're lifting it too quickly. And they did both cite their concern, not just for the safety of the people here in Arizona, but that the migrants are treated, those individuals and families that are coming across the border are treated humanely and efficiently. And so I think, this is a case where their intentions are probably good, and they see a problem that maybe isn't quite what they think it is. First off, we've talked about how Title 42 is a health measure that honestly, it was never effective in curbing COVID cases because COVID coming across the border was never the issue. In fact, those on the other side of the border, people coming across didn't have higher rates of COVID than people within the United States. That was never an actual issue. We didn't know, of course, at the very beginning of the pandemic and everything shut down. But really it was used. Title 42 has been used as a tool to curb immigration, not as a way to protect the health of our nation. And so I'm not sure that our senators here in Arizona really grasp the way that Title 42 has quite frankly been abused. And I think when they're concerned about migrants and the way that these people are going to be treated, I think it also shows a lack of understanding of what they're facing. Anna already talked about the terrible conditions that so many people are facing as they wait to come across into our country. They're facing violence. They're facing theft, hunger. Just they're in terrible conditions. It's not like we're telling them to stay in a 5-star hotel on the other side of the border until we let them in. People are in dire conditions, and so to delay that isn't as humane as it might sound. Like, oh, we want them to have a better process. Sounds like a great idea, except that they're not waiting in an ideal situation. And so that's part of the problem. And the other thing that Anna mentioned is, we've seen this before. We had immigration, and there are places where it's working the way that it should. And I remember, I believe it was end of 2018, beginning of 2019, that we did see a large increase in people who were seeking asylum here in the United States. And it was a really stressful time, but I was just shocked and in awe of the way that members of our community here in the Phoenix Valley, and I know Yuma and Tucson, there are other places that were receiving busloads with hundreds of people and families that were being dropped off at bus stations with no money. What few items they had were probably taken when they were in ICE custody. And to see the way that churches and other communities members just rallied around these people and welcomed them. We saw some of the other, and there was some ugliness. But the ability of these, and especially communities that aren't necessarily affluent, that didn't have much of their own, and how much they gave to these families coming through, the idea that we can't do that again, it's silly to me. Of course we can welcome, and a lot of people seeking asylum aren't necessarily going to stop in border states like Texas and Arizona, but instead are going to family members who are scattered across the United States. So it doesn't really place the burden on Arizona and Texas and other border states the way that I think a lot of people worry it will.
Yeah, that's really great information, Christy. And I think also to your point, and people who are coming at the border seeking asylum, maybe there's from many people that don't understand or aren't educated about asylum, they have this stereotype notion that it's only people from South America countries or Latin countries, and that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing people all over the world who are fleeing from dangerous conditions back home, and they are traveling through very, very dangerous paths to get to U.S. port of entry to apply for asylum. We are seeing people from places like Cameroon and other places in Africa who are making a long journey from the Middle East to a port of entry to the US, because really this is the only way that they can apply for asylum here. And so I think it's important to note that as well. And I think the other question that I had for you is, I know you talked a little bit about senators in Arizona, Mark Kelly and Senator Sinema, and the Title 42 anti-legislation they introduced. Can you talk a little bit more, maybe specifically with how that looks like maybe at the Arizona State Legislature with anti-immigrant bills, and also how we are mobilizing advocates after May 23rd in your state?
Absolutely. Okay, so yeah, Arizona has kind of a rough history of anti-immigration legislation, unfortunately. But after, some of you may be familiar with SB 1070, which was a very, I mean, there's no other way to say it. It was a very racist bill that basically encouraged racial profiling. And it was a very ugly bill. And a lot of people in Arizona were quite upset that it passed. And part of it was kind of curbed back from Supreme Court ruling, but parts of it are still in place. And so we've seen a little bit of a reprieve since then of like really ugly anti-immigrant legislation. But there is a bill that's currently in, I believe it's in the Senate, and it's already passed the House. And it was introduced by Representative Kavanaugh, who has already he's already evidenced his misconceptions about Afghan evacuees and the dangers that they pose, which they are not dangerous. They are our allies. And I know he's gotten some education. Some of our groups here in Arizona have met with him a few times, and he seems to be learning. But this is an area where he is concerned and basically wants to show, I think he thinks he can prove that immigrants are committing crimes at high rates, which just isn't accurate. On average, immigrants commit crimes at much lower levels. And so this SB 2326 would create basically an immigrant crime database and include mugshots, and I think it allows deputization of citizens. So it essentially creates like vigilantism, where people can, if they see someone and they think, oh, that person looks like this mugshot I saw, they can then make a citizen's arrest. I mean, it really is just horrifying, the amount of fear I think it would create, in the amount of hate. I see no way that would go into place without hate crimes increasing. And so it hasn't made it. There's one more committee it has to go through, and it hasn't yet. We and other organizations in the state have been targeting a few specific senators that we're hopeful would be, particularly Republican senators who are more moderate and more likely to understand our concerns, so that it doesn't go anywhere. And so we've reached out to them personally. We've encouraged our members to reach out to those senators, and several organizations, I believe there were at least 50 signers on a letter that went out speaking against that law. And those are kind of the ways that we've reached out. But what really makes a difference, I think, and this is one thing that MWEG really appreciates, and I know We Are All America, and I've met with Anna in other meetings too, is to make those contacts ahead of time, not to wait for there to be a crisis or a bill that's particularly concerning, but to have things like Refugee Advocacy Day that We Are All America has hosted multiple years here in Arizona, and be able to form those relationships with our legislators, so that we already have a relationship when these bills that are, really, really alarming come out, that we've already built a trusted relationship. So when we say we have serious concerns, those legislators, they say, okay, well, you're a person, an organization that I trust. I want to hear your concerns because I trust you. And so building those relationships at the state level, but even at the federal level, we've worked like other organizations, to have those relationships with staff members on both Kelly and Cinema's teams so that we can try to express, and educate as best we can.
Thank you so much, Christy. And you're absolutely right. It is so important to build those relationships with elected officials so they can come to you. They know who to go to, as you said, to a trusted member of the community who knows the community well, knows this population and is an expert in this topic. And it's so important to spend that time organizing your community and building these relationships with legislators. So that's really, really helpful. And now we're just going to kind of shift a little bit for a few minutes before we close our show for today. Maybe if I can hear from each one of you on your thoughts on how can people support the work that's happening with asylum, whether that's nationally in border states, and what are the next steps that people can take? And I'll start off, whoever wants to start.
I can get started if that's okay. I think that by being here, by being part of this conversation, you are already making a huge difference, becoming involved and informed on what the topics are, where the help is needed. Christy mentioned virtual advocacy days. This is a good opportunity for our representatives, members of Congress, to hear directly from their constituents on what the concerns are, but also, most importantly, for us to remind them that we are part of communities who are ready to welcome, who are ready to host. We are communities who are ready to begin helping with the restoration of our asylum system, and that we're ready to help. And I think it's important for us to remember that restoring asylum, calling for an end to Title 42, goes directly attached to the individuals who are being impacted, to mothers who are being forced to separate from their children, and they have to cross a river on their own, and that family separation that's being caused by this Title 42 expulsions, or families who are getting kidnapped as soon as they are being expelled by CBP officials. They're getting kidnapped as soon as they get back to Mexico. I think for us, remembering who these people are, the risk that they are experiencing in Mexico, and for us putting a voice to their needs when we're meeting with our representatives, I think it's very important that our members of Congress hear directly from you as a constituent your concern, and that our communities are ready to welcome. Recently, we mentioned that the Texan governor is busing people to the DC area. This is happening. It began last week. And we are seeing how the DC community is rapidly coming together to welcome these individuals who arrive with nothing but what they're wearing. So our representatives should know that as a community, we're ready to help, we're ready to host, and we're ready to restore the asylum system.
Thank you, Anna. Stacy or Christy?
Well, one thing, I just to kind of take it one step further from what Anna has mentioned, contacting, civic leaders is critical. But another way to get your voice out is to write an op-ed or even a short letter to the editor. And so trying to share your story, if you have, immigrant roots, or to share your experience with, if you've worked with refugees, if you've got a neighbor who's undocumented, not that you would ever share personal information, but just to share those stories on a broader scale can be really helpful, because then it shows other civic leaders, oh, maybe my community is ready to welcome these folks seeking asylum. And so it really sends a good message when we get
we can not just communicate with those civic leaders, but have even just a few sentences. Letters to the editor in particular don't have to be very long. And we actually have an op-ed lab that is happy to help. So anyone who's looking to write and is a little nervous can always reach out to me or to Stacy, and we can get you in touch with someone who can help.
Thank you for that resource, Christy. And Stacy, turn it over to you.
Thank you. So I really liked what Christy had to say. And also, Anna, I think just really changing how you look at things, being willing to have hard conversations with people, because people just don't understand, they don't know, and they're getting really poor information. And so rather than being reactionary, like we're seeing a lot of our leaders, and being kind of explosive and, in the moment, headline, really think of what actions you can take. Not everybody is at the border, right? Not everybody has an opportunity to physically serve somebody at the border, but there are other ways you can connect to better information. National Immigration Forum they just have wonderful explainers on just about anything that you might need to know. They involve themselves in advocacy days, so you can reach out to somebody and get involved. Those types of advocacy days seem, oh, well, I don't know enough, but you know what? You have a heart and a passion to help people. And if you're willing to listen and learn, you can make a difference in your community. Christy mentioned those op-eds. A lot of different groups have call to actions. If you are feeling like, I don't know where to start, I don't know how to contact my congressman, utilize a call to action. International Rescue Committee has one right now. They have one about Title 42 and also opposing some other anti-immigration bills that are coming up. It kind of helps you along the way. But it really is important to speak up. Your legislators, they do keep track of these things. If they hear opposition to a bad bill, or if they hear that you are for ending Title 42, they listen, and we want to make sure that our voices are being represented, and we're representing the voices of these asylum seekers, of people who, we've been turning away, so that they can, like Anna said, we can restore the asylum process. That's so powerful. This restoration, we have this opportunity to change it, to make it better, rather than utilizing a policy to keep people away, because we are a country that is welcoming. We are built on refugees and immigrants. We need refugees and immigrants in our communities now. And so if you can find a way to take action instead of to just react to other people, that is the best way.
Thank you so much, Stacy. And thank you to all three of my speakers for such a rich and amazing dialogue, for bringing your expertise. We really, really appreciate you being on our show today. And thank you for everyone else who joined us. We hope that this was helpful and informational. Please be sure to follow us on our social media and subscribe to our newsletter. And that will conclude our Refugee Matters series for today. Thank you, everyone.